The Sony A7C is a tiny powerhouse of a camera. It's basically the same as the A7 III, which, as you probably know, is a staple within the mirrorless video world. However, it's not without its limitations. And after just about a year and a half of using this camera for pretty much everything, today we're going to jump into what I found to be the best cinematic settings for the A7C. Okay, so starting off with file format. The A7C has 10 built-in picture profiles. Now, you can customize this any which way you want to your desire, but we're going to be talking about everything from the default. So I use two mainly. The first one is picture profile 10. This is my most commonly used one. It's what I'm using right now, and it's what I use whenever I am vlogging with this camera. Picture profile 10 uses HLG3 with the BT 2020 color space, and the reason that I use HLG3 is because it's a softer curve. It's not quite as flat as S-Log, so it doesn't require as much correction to get it back to the BT 2020 or Rec 709, depending on where you want to work it to. So it's a little easier to work with. It's actually very, very easy just to like correct your blacks, add a little bit of contrast and you're done. Whereas S-Log is a much flatter curve. I use HLG3 mostly for things like this. So YouTube and vlogging and anything where we're just out and about and I just quickly, pull up the camera or whatever, and I'm not thinking too heavily about the exposure and stuff like that. It's a little bit more forgiving than S-Log is in terms of being okay footage. The other profile I use a lot is picture profile 7, which is S-Log 2, despite what I was just saying about S-Log. S-Log 2 with the S-Gamut3.Cine with saturation boosted to 24. So I've mentioned the saturation boost twice now, and this actually goes back to a Done Did It video that I think if you're a Sony shooter, you should absolutely check out. Two videos in particular. There's this Done Did It video correcting S-Log 2 with this saturation boost, and there's the Gerald Undone picture profile comprehensive review. And I think those two videos themselves are incredible for you to be able to understand exactly what's happening inside your camera when you're using any of these picture profiles or any of these, log curves or HLGs or whatever. So to summarize the Done Did It video, you boost saturation before the memory card so that when you load it into Resolve or Premiere, you can then pull down the saturation. And once you've done your grading and you've boosted stuff and you've been playing around, what you'll actually find is that blotchy skin tone completely disappears. I say completely disappears, okay, that's a lie. It massively reduces it pretty much everywhere apart from when the skin is massively underexposed and then you boost it by quite a lot. But the blotchy skin is massively improved across the board when doing this little saturation trick, which is great because that's like the one fault of 8-bit Sony cameras is obviously you can't push and pull them quite as much. I mostly use S-Log 2 for anything to do with client content. If I'm doing B-roll, like it does allow me to correct that just that little bit more, which I find helps by being able to like push and pull it just a little bit more than HLG. So then one of the real tough things about the Sony A7C is the fact that it is only 8-bit video. It's the same as the A7 III. So if you've been used to working with the A7 III and maybe you swapped to the Sony A7C because it had a couple of extra perks, like the color science was a teeny bit better and the noise was a little bit better and the flip screen, because why on earth do people not have flip screens on every single camera? Honestly, like this camera is insane. The 8-bit is the only thing in my opinion that lets it down. It's the only reason I want to get an FX3 at some point rather than this, because I think otherwise, in the world where everyone is making 1080 by 1920 videos for TikTok and Instagram Reels, something like this is pretty much all you need, right? Where most of the content is just ending up there. Obviously, when you're making something a lot more documentary-esque or something to a much higher caliber, cinema cameras come into their own. But for your day-to-day video clients, small businesses, corporate, all that kind of stuff, this thing is just perfect for it. So the other thing I want to touch on is correcting the digital look. People say that digital has a certain look to it, a certain clinicalness, a certain cleanliness, and for the most part, I think that is true. I think there's some kind of subjectiveness to how this is perceived. Some people really like it, some people don't. I personally love the creamy cinematic look, without getting too pretentious about it. I just like the way that it looks. So pretty much all the time I am avoiding that digital look by putting a mist filter on the front. So I've got the Moment Cinebloom 10% on the front. So it's very slight. It's nothing heavily stylized. It just helps those highlights kind of roll off a little nicer. It gives a little bit of extra bloom in places. And I think it's quite key if you want to get that, like I said, cinematic, again, not being too pretentious with it, but the cinematic look, I think having a mist filter on this camera is absolutely imperative. Okay, so we've covered off settings and we've covered off obviously adding like a mist filter to whatever glass you're using, but I don't want to detract from the fact that getting cinematic video from a camera like this is mostly going to come down to how good you are at basically cinematography, how good you are at manipulating light, creating layers of light. The lighting is one of the most important parts of any video, any set. Obviously set design comes as well. I wouldn't really say there's like an order. I'd say they all kind of need to all be as good as each other in order to give the level of convincing deliverable that you're looking for. But I do not want to detract from just how important lighting is. By all means, you can have the best camera settings. You could have an Ariel Exa, you could have a Tiffin 1 mist filter on it, right, 101, and you could have the flattest light possible. Yes, the image is going to feel nicer than something recorded on an A7C, but it's not going to be more cinematic. And like I said, that all comes down to the way you're shooting, the way you're lighting your scene, the way that you've designed your scene. Don't get too caught up in camera specs and gear. But that's it. I hope you took something from this video in order to be able to make your A7C a little bit more cinematic than it comes straight out of the box. But I am actually going to do a follow-up video to this on what to do on the other side. So when you pull your footage into Resolve. So don't forget to subscribe, like the video and like the bell to stay up to date for whenever I release a new video. But until then, see ya.